This afternoon, I'm going to be introducing Win Cooper. Win Cooper is a poet. He has published 5 books of poetry. He's a poet I greatly admire. His poetry comes out of an extraordinary intelligence. In his poems, the universe wavers, and the poet tries to find the secret words that will bring it under control. The road is empty, and then the road fills up with all of the things that it might have but doesn't. It's an interesting universe that Win Cooper inhabits, and he's charmed us all, and written a number of books that just resound within me forever. After reading some poems, Win is going to change gears and give a few comments on his craft. And this is doubly interesting today because Win is going to follow that with a reading from not poems again, but his first novel, Way Out West. So it's a double whammy here today, and I'm sure you'll enjoy what you hear. Would you please welcome Win Cooper?
Okay. When Samantha was talking about blurbs from dead writers, I couldn't help but remember, I think it was Howard Moss, who was a poet, who I believe was the poetry editor of The New Yorker, and he, on one of his books of poems, he had 3 blurbs from 3 dead people. One was Nietzsche. I don't remember who the third one was, but my favorite one was from Sigmund Freud, and it said, Howard Moss manages to do in a few pages what it took me a lifetime to undo. Many years ago, I was asked to write a postcard poem from the town that I live in, which is a little town called Halifax in Vermont. And I had so much, and I said, what do you mean a postcard poem? And he said, well, the editor said, just write a poem about something or someone quirky in your town. And that was the easiest assignment I ever had, because pretty much every person and everything in my town is quirky, believe me. All 500 of the people have something going on. And so I wrote that poem, and then I ended up writing 200 more. Because it was so much fun and so easy. I was just writing postcards from different places in Vermont, Robert Frost's grave, Brigham Young's birthplace, etc. And so I wrote, many from Vermont. And then I thought, well, wait a minute, this is kind of fun. So I started writing poems from other places in the world, and then places I hadn't been, and then from outer space, and then from emotions. And so I'm just going to read you a few of these. The book is called Postcards from the Interior. Most of the poems do not fit on postcards, but this one does. And this is, I live on the Green River. This is Postcard from Green River. The church towers over the village like a god. Imagine that. 3 of the residents are bad. No one knows the word for loud. And I am from Michigan originally, and believe it or not, there is a town in Michigan called Hell. So this was a postcard that I wrote to my wife. Postcard from Hell. I'm less than an hour northwest of Ann Arbor on the second most winding road in Michigan. Hell is perched on a hill above a man-made lake, 40 or so houses, a few stores, and Dam Creek, which runs under the intersection. Postcards in the store say, "Greetings from hell. Welcome to hell. Go to hell." The guy pumping my gas tells me about the weathermen on the Detroit TV stations, how they try not to laugh when they report every November that hell froze over last night. I am cold without you, not burning in hell like I thought I would be. And since I happen to have a postcard that takes place on an island, this seems like the appropriate place to read it. Postcard Lost at Sea. He tells me everything is his now, the island, the wind that rocks the wreckage that once was his craft. The blotches on his face suggest sun or regret. The word he hates most is accident. I hang on to each thread of his fabrication, a yarn he wraps around himself. He had to have power somewhere, and to get here, he came by boat to see if he could leave a wake. He looks at my clothes and sees a sail. I tell him I have been here longer. My words billow in the wind of his eyes. And this is called Postcard from a Party. I should also mention that many of I think about 12 of the poems in this book were made into songs, and this was one of them. Postcard from the Party. You have to be invited, and there's nothing you can do to be asked. Headlines and bloodlines don't help. It's a long way from home, but I'm here, the view much better than I'm used to. How did this happen? Dumb but good luck, right place and time, the planets aligned. No contract, no deadline, no risk. And what did I do to deserve this? Slept with all the wrong people, gambled too much on friends of friends with light bulbs over their heads, wrote every day, no matter what. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my writing process as I go, but the real key to my writing process is the last line of that poem, to write every day, which I almost do. I'm taking 4 days off while I'm here. And this is the title poem from my most recent book of poems, which is called Mars Poetica. Imagine you're on Mars, looking at Earth, a swirl of colors in the distance. Tell us what you miss most or least. Let your feelings rise to the surface. Skim that surface with a tiny net. Now you're getting the hang of it. Tell your story slantwise, streetwise, in the disguise of an astronaut in his suit. Tell us something we didn't know before, how words mean things we didn't know we knew. I'm glad this podium is here because, as I told Kaylee, it hides my shaking knees. Okay. For some unknown reason, I've written a lot of poems about fashion. I have no idea why. And I hope my clothes match because I'm colorblind. And yesterday, Sarah DeVello, is that how you say her name? DeVello? Sarah, yeah. Told me that 23% of men are colorblind, and that made me feel a lot better. The next new thing. Darling of couture, petri dish of fashion, tell me which way the Mistral blows today, toward the cuts of Milan or the billows of Paris, the stark New York style or the bright hues of Rio. What's in the air for fall, charity or schadenfreude? A toned-down boho look? Please know I'm going insane with desire for the next new thing, style that won't come back. On a slightly dark, somewhat, much darker note, this is an elegy for my friend Liam Rector, who was a really, really fine poet who shot himself 16 years ago. How silent the trees. How the hell are you? I want to ask, but can't. You're dead. How hard the snow fell. How slowly it melts. How to tie a knot big enough to choke the wild pain. how to listen carelessly to words used carefully, how answers to questions often contain no answer, how to wind a watch so tight time stops, how silent the trees, how loud the shots of hunters. And this poem is called Three Loves. I gave 3 loves away, one to books, one to hooks, and one love to you, which you kept close. I gave 3 loaves away in California, one to Alice, a poet, one to Greg, a lawyer, one to a homeless girl on Telegraph Avenue. I gave 3 lives away, one to work, one to play, one to what I saw when I closed my eyes. And I'm going to read you just a couple new poems. I just finished my new book of poems last week, so I'm pretty happy about that, and now I can write another novel. I wrote some poems that were related to the pandemic, during the pandemic, but rather than being directly about the pandemic, I tried to just write more about the emotions that I had and that perhaps other people had, which is kind of what I do in my poems in general. I never sit down to write a poem about one thing, unless somebody asks me to write one for their wedding. And only one of those 4 are still married. So don't ask me. And that's this. I'll talk about that a little bit more when I read you a short excerpt from my novel. This poem is called Figuration. The sadness of diplomas, of frames that hold them, of umlauts and the imperative tense, idioms and assonance and bitter pills, class and caste and paste that dries too quickly to unglue, of dial tones and minor chords and kumbaya, of the tone-deaf singer who won't stop crooning until the band packs up and leaves. The silence of lawn chairs in falling snow, half-built houses draped in tarps, satellites that blink across night sky, their lights a pulse that leave no trace. The sorrow of the understudy, of waiting in the wings, of missing scripts and words for wishes, candles that won't stay lit, of tracks in snow that weave through trees, smells that bloodhounds chase, of rage and sirens and wine-dark seas, ears stuffed with cotton, of being buckled in, holding and being held, of empty runways and distant places no planes fly to. When I used to teach, I would talk a lot with my students about the meaning of poems and how, again, I don't want to harp on this too much, but that the emotion of a poem matters to me more than what the poem is saying or what the poem is actually about. And this poem appeared in the New Yorker a few years ago, and even I hardly know what this poem is about. And I had so many reactions because so many people read the New Yorker, and so many people wrote to me or called me or contacted me on Facebook or whatever. And out of all those people, only 2 people ever asked me, so what the hell is that poem about? And I'm kind of glad, because it's kind of hard to explain. Anyway, it's called I Trust the Wind and Don't Know Why. I am not the girl in the picture. I am not the smell of hyacinths. I might be the boy. I am off the record. I am not a view from the island, not the sound of waves breaking, not parasols scattered on sand. I am closed for the season. I'm fingerprints on windows that look out on rain. I am rain that rains harder. I'm not the new fashion, not hands on a clock. I don't spring forward, cannot turn back. I am yellow caution tape strung from pole to pole, police line, do not cross. I see the sky, but nothing in it, just spots on the sun, then the long twilight, then the crackle of the stars. And I want to read you the beginning of my novel, which is called Way Out West. I'll tell you a little bit about it first. My first book of poems came out in 1987, and I was in the PhD program in creative writing at the University of Utah, and one of my fellow poets said, I'm going to write a novel. And we all kind of laughed at him like, yeah, sure, you're going to write a novel. And he said, look, I'm just going to write 1 page a day, and for a year, every day for a year, and then I'll have a novel. And I thought, well, if Harvey can do that, I can do that. And so I just tried to write a page a day, and it took me about a year and a half, but I wrote a novel. I revised it, I sent it to agents in New York and publishers in New York, and I used a couple of my writer friends' connections to put in good words for me and for the novel, and everybody rejected it. And I really hate rejection, and so I didn't send it out again for 33 years. I just put it in a box, and as I moved to different places in the country, I always brought the box with me, of course, thank God. I would take it out about every 5 years and read it and think, hey, I wrote a novel. Even if it never gets published, at least I can say I wrote a novel, right? So then just 2 years ago, I sent it to a publisher called Concord Free Press, which is in Concord, Massachusetts. They accepted it, obviously. And then suddenly I realized, oh my God, people are going to read this. Maybe it's not that good. And maybe this, Anyway, so then I not only revised the novel, I actually made a new plot. I got rid of the old plot, put a new plot in, and I can assure you that it's easier to just write another novel than to try to change the plot in the one you've already written. But I did it. And what else can I tell you? I guess nothing. I'll just read the first chapter. The other thing I wanted to say was that because I had only ever written poems, I had never written fiction before, the first chapter just kind of sounds like one of my poems, I think. You can decide. And I didn't know where it was going. I had no idea who this person was that I was writing about. I didn't know that I was going to introduce the woman main character in the next chapter, and that they would meet in this bizarre way, that they would fall in love, that they would struggle with their own problems, with their pasts and their drug use and alcohol use and their mothers and whatnot. And it just kept happening. And I know it sounds ridiculous when novelists say, oh, the characters just tell me what they're going to do. But it's kind of true. And I didn't know how the novel was going to end until I got to the last chapter. I know that sounds absolutely ridiculous. So maybe I should just read it and shut up. Hang on one sec. The first chapter is called Fire and Ice. It begins here in these mountains rising out of the desert. This desert that seems endless in summer and endlessly hot and cold in winter, when movie crews spend freezing days filming life elsewhere in the galaxy. This is the moon, they say. Let's get weightless, as they pass a bottle of gin around. Even as their vision blurs, they see these mountains clearly in the middle distance. And as they continue to drink, the things around them begin to move, to sway, to lose their weight in the lunar night, except the mountains, which remind them of everything that was ever stable in their lives, or pleasant, or real. Tyler Dutton is alone in these mountains. His breath is a mix of granola, gin, and fear. He is almost out of his awful breath, climbing a snowfield by the light of the moon. It is mid-December, one of the longest nights of the year, and his sweat freezes to his skin whenever he stops for air. He's still more than half convinced he's not going back down, that this is where he belongs, that if he climbs all night, the alcohol will leave his body. There have been neither stars nor sun for almost a week, But Tyler knows the sun will rise in a few hours. The clouds will dissipate. By then, he'll be near the top of these peaks, on a large plateau he thinks he saw from the valley yesterday. And he'll be so much closer to the sun, most of the snow will melt. He knows it will. The words perfect atmosphere keep rolling slowly, almost warmly through his mind. He thinks of the atmosphere of bars, restaurants, hotels, places of food and drink and warmth, but he's not fooled, not a fool. He hates those places and will not go back. He's afraid he may lose some fingers or toes tonight. He knows he can't fool his body for long, but this is a real place, real snow, real cold air, and he knows that means something. Tyler climbs. He knows he might die. He could die in the next 10 seconds if he lost a hand or foothold and slid down, banging his head on the long frozen slope. Unconscious, he would freeze to death. Not the worst way to go, he thinks. Or he might make the top. The sun might rise and be unusually warm, and he might be comfortable as he starves to death. These options, he decides, don't go well with the words on his lips. Perfect atmosphere. Things may improve by morning. Right now, he knows what he's doing. There are no stars, but there's a moon. He can see more than where he's going. He can see everything. He remembers the desert below as a nightmare and thinks of this mountain not as a dream, but something far more serious. How's my time?
Your time is 5 more minutes and then questions.
Okay, very good. 5 minutes. I'll just read the rest of the chapter then, because I don't want to leave you hanging or climbing a mountain by the light of the moon in the middle of winter in the middle of Nevada. Those parts of the Deep Creek Mountains that face north keep the snow all winter. Most of the east and west faces also keep it, especially up high. The southern exposures are different. Not much snow, lots of direct sun, and warm air that comes up from Snake Valley. It's in this air that Tyler sleeps. His hands and feet are numb, so numb they don't hurt. He stumbled onto this dry patch of ground, blind with fatigue as the sun was about to rise. Now it is up, and the wind that last night froze his sweat to his skin has carried the clouds east. As he opens his eyes, he knows he's lucky. He must use his head and not depend on dumb luck, must make plans, thaw his fingers and toes, build a sundial, maybe even pray. He does not want to think about how he felt last night. He wants to remember only the single-mindedness that got him here. He wants, he does not want. He has enough to think about. He has had enough. Every thought is processed twice, even when others push their way to the front. He wasn't crazy last night. He was drunk, he was cold, he was stubborn, he was stupid. He was taking a calculated risk, but calculated from the depths of a drunken mind. He was testing his luck, and his luck a frayed rope held. He was never scared, and that helped. The moon helped, and now the sun is helping. It seems impossibly warm, more luck, for the dead of winter 2 miles above sea level in one of the most desolate places on earth. Tyler looks at the earth around him, the earth below. He's sure he could see 100 miles in any direction, the desert brownish gray this time of year, the mountains mostly white where they swell up, small ranges running on straight north-south lines. He rubs his hands and feet slowly, the sensation returning. Not slowly enough, though. They begin to burn violently, the hot blood rushing to the extremities it had abandoned hours before. His hands feel like 2 sticks rubbed together too quickly, now falling to ash. He wants them numb again and looks around for snow, but that would be stupid. He sees a rock and walks toward it instead, his feet on fire, but holding him up. The rock is shaped like a nail, longer than his hand. He balances it head down on a flat spot and gathers smaller rocks nearby. Some are frozen to the ground, and he can't force them out with his hands or feet, which hurt so badly he's crying now, dropping to his knees in pain. Then he stands, facing north, the tall rock in his shadow. He places the other rocks in a circle around it to simulate a clock. He steps out of the way, and his sundial tells him it's noon. High noon. Hang 'em high. 5 hours until sundown. He remembers telling himself last night how real this was. Today, real has lost its charm. He's hungry, thirsty for a real drink. He'd rather be high at noon in a warm truck riding out of the desert, this desert that might let him live. Wintertime, and the die-in is easy. Is he singing? No. He's lying on his back, eyes closed to the straight-up sun, staying calm, getting warm, thinking. Rocky Raccoon checked into his room, only to find Gideon's Bible. Should he pray? Tyler sits up and opens his eyes. His rival, it seems, had broken his dreams. Why this song, he wonders. Rocks around him, sitting on a rock, Rocky Mountains. No, they're further east. The doctor came in, stinking of gin. Tyler stunk of it last night, straight out of the bottle, no tonic in this wasted desert. What's this land good for? Salt flats smoothed by God's hand so men can drive faster than they can think. Great for testing jet fighters to learn the details of killing the blurred world below, but not a place to die. It does not end here. Thank you. Do we have time for questions or not?
We do have time for questions.
Okay, good.
Yep. And I'd like to first. Okay.
Go ahead.
So Tyler does meet a woman in the next chapter?
Yes, he does, and the novel gets considerably lighter than that rather dark first chapter. Yes, he meets a woman named Robin in the next chapter. She actually runs into him with her truck, and that's how they meet. And she attempts to nurse him back to health. He has just run away he was a stuntman on a movie, and he's gotten tired of the movie, and he's climbing up this mountain in obviously a suicidal mood. And then he meets her, and he gets offered a job directing the film that he had just quit. And he can't really figure out why they want him to be the director. And then he and Robin figure out that something really weird is going on with this movie, and that it appears that the government is funding the movie. It takes place in 1983 and 1984 when Reagan was doing the Star Wars thing, the Strategic Defense Initiative. And so I'm not going to tell you much more, but they're very curious about what is going on, who is funding this movie, which is taking place in part on the Nevada test site where they used to test bombs, obviously, in the 50s and 60s. And Robin and Tyler try to figure out what is going on, who's funding this movie, et cetera, but they can't really figure that out until they deal with their own demons, because they're really messed up people. And so you have to read the novel to find out what happens. Yes, writer.
I have tremendous respect for the fact that you were able to go from one genre to the next one. I'm a CNF writer, and I could not for the life of me switch to fiction. Right. And I wondered what was that like going from poetry to fiction? It baffles me that you could do that.
I wrote it in 1987 and 1988, so it's hard to remember what it felt like then. It felt good. I mean, I remember that, and you know what really feels good though? For decades, people would say, "What do you do?" And I'd say, "I'm a writer." "Oh, what do you write?" "Poetry." And then they would say, "Oh, look at that cloud out there. Isn't that pretty?" And now I'd say, "Well, I just published a novel." "Oh, really? A novel?" and then they want to talk to me, and it's an unbelievable difference, because everybody's read a novel, but not everybody's read a book of poems. And so I'm really not answering your question, Ryder, and I'm sorry, I just don't know.
No, that's right. I mean, I
It-
can hear the poetry
Yeah,
in the novel, but
right.
I wondered how difficult it was to switch. You have to do structure and
Right,
plot
right.
was that difficult?
Oh yeah, it was, and it was, as I said, I can't remember that well what it felt like then, but when I had to revise this, I didn't have to. It was accepted. I didn't have to change anything. I wanted to, because I wanted the ending to make a little bit more sense, or to make sense at all. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life, was trying to figure out how to put all these pieces together. And so now I've just barely started another novel, and I've spent a year and a half I don't want to go that route. I don't want to write a novel where I don't know what's going to happen. I want to have, an outline and a structure. And I spent all this time just every day for, over a year, just sitting there with a blank screen on my computer, not coming up with any ideas. And then I went back to a poem that was in my first book, that's a poem about my uncle being murdered, which he was. And I read that poem again, and I thought, oh, I think I have a plot. So now you know what my next novel is going to be about. Anyway, yes?
So would you go back to the New Yorker poem a moment and tell us what sense it made to you?
Well, it was the refugees were leaving Syria, and they were getting on boats, and they were landing in Lesbos, in one of the places in Greece. And my niece was there on a study abroad thing, and it made me think about how wonderful her life is, and how terrible the life is for the people that are getting on boats to leave their violent country. And that got me going. And the poem is also about identity, male, female, there's just a lot of little things in the poem about identity, whether that's our identity or the identity of people in other countries. But the poem is really just more a series of images that I hope evoke emotion. But the poem is not telling a story. I don't think it's telling a story. But it's amazing how many people, I love that poem. And then I always want to say, well, what do you think it's about? Because I don't know.
Could you read it again?
Sure, if I have time. I don't want to go over.
I think you have time.
Okay. It's not very long. I trust the wind and don't know why. I am not the girl in the picture. I am not the smell of hyacinths. I might be the boy. I am off the record. I am not a view from the island, not the sound of waves breaking, not parasols scattered on sand. I am closed for the season. I'm fingerprints on windows that look out on rain. I am rain that rains harder. I'm not the new fashion, not hands on a clock. I don't spring forward, cannot turn back. I am yellow caution tape strung from pole to pole, police line, do not cross. I see the sky, but nothing in it, just spots on the sun. Then the long twilight, then the crackle of stars. Thank you. Yeah? Okay.
How much of the original novel wound up in the novel that you wound up with?
Oh, most of it. Oh, yeah, almost all. I just had to change the plot. So, yeah, I know. It only took 5 minutes. No, it took months. I didn't really. It's just the plot. The characters were all the same. It was just like what's happening with the movie and the government, and that's the part of the plot. I didn't change the the love story of Robin and Tyler, or, sorry, I guess I wasn't clear on that. It wasn't, it didn't change much, but it was just hard to do. That's all. Yeah. Yes?
You mentioned that 12 of your poems became songs.
Right.
I wondered how that happened.
Well, I had a poem called Fun in my first book that was made into a song called All I Want to Do by Sheryl Crow, which did pretty well, won a couple Grammys. I took my mom to the Grammys. And because of that song, other people wanted to write songs with me, so I ended up going to LA a couple times and writing lyrics. Well, I mostly wanted people to take my poems and turn them into songs. I didn't want to write song lyrics because, baby, baby, and all of that. So I tried to get the musicians that I worked with to base the songs on my poems. And then I ended up getting a record deal because of the songs that I wrote with Madison Smart Bell, who's a novelist, a great novelist who my novel is dedicated to. And they hired this the producer who did REM and a bunch of other famous bands, and half of that album is my poems set to music, and then half of the album is lyrics that I wrote that Madison set to music, and you can hear those songs on 5 television shows now. So that's how that happened. I'm like the luckiest poet in America. I mean, I absolutely am, and I'm aware of that, and I'm thankful every day. Yeah, I'm no Bob Dylan. Yes, ma'am. True Blood, and it's not new television shows, but the ones that are still in reruns. True Blood, and Bones, and The Unit, and I'm so bad at. There's 2 more. I can't remember. Sorry. And then All I Want to Do is in a few movies and stuff too. So.
Do you read much fiction yourself?
I read almost entirely fiction. I work as an editor. I'm a freelance editor. People send me their novels and memoirs and poetry manuscripts. They want to get them published, and I help them. I'm a book doctor, basically. So I read, and I prefer editing novels to editing anything else. So yes, and I'm always reading novels. It's kind of insane. I get up in the morning, and I give myself a half an hour to an hour to just read for pleasure. Then I edit people's books, in the morning and early afternoon, and then I write in the late afternoon, and then in the evening I go back to the novel I'm reading. So I'm glad I was an English major. Paid off. So, anyone else? No? Yes?
I just wanted to comment that the poem from the New Yorker reminds me of some artwork my husband paints. He'll say, I'm not done yet. I'm like, don't do anything else.
Oh, right.
I like it the way it is.
Right.
And I equate your poem that the words are going to mean something perhaps different to every person that listens to it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
The selection of your words,
Right.
like so oftentimes, probably had a lot of those thoughts but never were able to express them
Mm-hmm.
on paper.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And, the same thing has happened with my novel. I've had unbelievably different reactions. I've had people say, that's really dark. And I've had my friend Ralph said, I laughed all the way through. And then other people have said, well, it's dark, and then it gets light, and then it gets dark. It goes back and forth. And I'm like, yeah, well, so do I. It's amazing that people can read a novel so differently. It's understandable that they're going to read poems differently, Anyway, we good?
And I think you're going to be signing copies of
I am, yes. Thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate it.